Hi, I'm Helen, and welcome to another episode of Dose of Pharma. Today, we're joined by Nell and Betty. Nell is a lecturer with 13 years worth of collective experience at Monash University, and her role at Monash comprises of curriculum design, physiology, pharmacology, undergraduate teaching, as well as education research in undergraduate students' sense of belonging, teamwork behavior, self-resilience, and self-regulated learning, and how these factors correlate to academic achievement. We're joined by Betty, who is a senior lecturer at Monash University and is currently leading a research lab on prostate physiology as a urology researcher. She's a co-creator and co-lead of Parkville International and Exchange Students, or PIES program in short, with Nell, to foster the sense of belonging for international students. And we'll be discussing science education, STEM, digital tools, and emerging technologies. Nell, can you please tell us a bit about yourself and how you became interested in science education and becoming a lecturer?
Sure. Thanks, Helen. How I became interested in science. So this probably goes all the way back to when I was in primary school. I think that's probably my earliest memory of liking science. And I always had a fascination with how things worked. So usually my parents have told me that I used to break things and then spend time figuring out how to fix it or put it back together. And I don't think they were very happy about that. But I think that's probably why I enjoyed science. So science to me is figuring out how things work or finding an explanation of how things work. And I'm really passionate about physiology and pharmacology. So my area and my teaching background is really about how the body works and how drugs work. And that's, what I find interesting. A little bit about my journey, I guess, since, having an interest in science, I went on to study biomedical science at the University of Melbourne. And then following that, I went on to do a year of honours in the area of neuroscience. And then I came to Monash here, to this faculty, to complete my PhD studies. And my, again, love of science and going from loving to learn about science and then going to teach science, that switch happened during my PhD. So it was during my PhD that I signed up to take some classes as a facilitator. Funnily enough, in some of the units that Betty used to unit coordinate. So I started off as a teacher in Betty's own units. And yeah, since then, as you said, about 12, 13 years teaching and now working as a full-time academic within the faculty here.
Oh, that's fantastic. And what about you, Betty?
Well, firstly, I'd like to say Nell was always a passionate teaching associate, so it doesn't surprise me that that's the path she took post-PhD. And I can't believe that you've been teaching for 13 years, Nell. That's incredible. So similar to Nell, I've always been, I would say, a passionate educator. So I started tutoring maths when I was 15 years old. And even before that, when I was in primary school, so obviously that was a long, long time ago, I was the one who teachers would ask to show students, who had trouble understanding things like fractions and other math related things, how to do them. And so then I completed my Bachelor of Science, majoring in physiology and pharmacology. So I always loved science. I considered becoming a maths science teacher. However, at that point, so that was 3 years undergrad, I decided to do honours because it was 1 year. And I guess I also wanted to see whether I liked research because I always enjoyed the practical classes that we used to do in undergrad science. And during the year that I did honours, I discovered that I really enjoyed research and that a career as an academic meant that I could teach as well. So that was sounding exciting. So as a PhD student, I did lots and lots of teaching. So I was at Monash University. I taught for the Faculty of Medicine. I taught for the Faculty of Science. And then I also taught some nursing students at Deakin University as well. So at the conclusion of my PhD, I knew that I wanted to teach and I just didn't want to do research full time. So really, academia seemed to be the perfect profession for me.
Thanks, Nell and Betty, for sharing. It's really fascinating to see and to know that with the love of science in the first place, you gradually discover yourself throughout the years and throughout your journey, and then gradually find out what you really want to do, what's suitable for you and what not, and then become who you are today as lecturer at Monash University. And you're both adored by a lot of students and staff on campus as excellent and diligent educators. So can you tell us a bit about how teaching has changed over the course of your careers?
I sure can. I've been teaching a long time, and I won't even include when I started teaching, as I mentioned, at the age of 15, nor will I include, teaching as a PhD student. So if I think about now in 2023, teaching is very different to the year 2000 when I first started teaching as a junior lecturer. So in 2023, our teaching model is really interactive. So as you would know, a typical lecture will be quite dynamic with lots of practice questions and opportunities for content clarification. And the expectation is that the students have completed the pre-learning material before coming to the class, and time is actually set aside for the students to do that pre-learning. The pre-learning is available to the students 2 weeks ahead of schedule and is quite structured, and it has learning outcomes incorporated, so it all looks really nice. In 2000, the teaching model was very different. It was quite didactic. So what I mean by that is that I would stand in front of the room, in front of the lecture theatre, and work my way through my lecture notes and slides. And the student's job was to furiously write down what I was explaining. And, I wasn't really giving them time for understanding or even for really applying their knowledge. That information is now provided to the students as the pre-learning material, so it just looks a lot more pretty. And another thing I used to have to do back in the year 2000 was print out my lecture notes for the entire class. So back then it was probably up to 200 students. So you could probably imagine I spent lots and lots of time at the printer and the photocopier. What about you, Nell?
Well, I was going to say, obviously, Betty, you've been teaching, a lot longer than I have, but even in my short amount of time teaching, even I've seen so many changes that have taken place if we think about education. I think technology comes to mind. Comparing it to, a decade ago, we have access to so many more educational tools and resources. And the positives that has brought is it's given us a whole different suite of tools to engage students and given us a different way to support their learning experience, I think. And I think that's been really important because technology is what students are used to these days. This is the generational era that, students are growing up in. And while it might seem a little bit more foreign to us, we've had to adapt because we want to make sure we're engaging students in the platforms that they're used to. So that's been a big change. I think with technology, it's also shifted the way the classroom is structured. And that's exactly what Betty was talking about before. Schools and universities now very commonly do blended learning. So that really didactic way of teaching is well and truly, we've moved on from that. And now we've got these blended learning models where it's a little bit of that traditional classroom with the teacher, the information coming from the teacher, but then we've got incorporation of the active learning and the technology and really allowing students to work at their own pace and giving them different ways of engaging with the material, whether it's online or reading material or videos or recorded lectures. And I think that's another sign of how the times have changed. Students, I think, Betty, I'm sure you'd agree, I think students really want flexibility. In this day and age, that's quite a high priority for students. And yeah, I think education has adapted in that way too. Again, reiterate what Betty said about the role of the teacher being different. That's another big change. The role of the teacher or educator is not so much the source of knowledge anymore. We are, in a way, facilitating you drawing information from different places and you putting those ideas together. So we're facilitating the process of learning. It's changed because a few decades ago, the source of truth was the teacher. But now there's so much information out there. The truth is already out there. You don't necessarily need that from us, but we're there to help you figure out what to do with all of that information. And the last thing I'd say is how the education or STEM education has changed. Probably a little bit of the expectations from the students have changed too. And that's not surprising. I think something that stood out to me and Betty too is because there's so much information available, we find that especially the younger students coming through first, second year are not quite sure what to do with all of that information. So they really want to know, what do we need to know? What's the answer, or what's the right way of answering a question? And I think that's just a reflection of the vast amount of information that's available to students. So it can be a little bit overwhelming what to do with that information. So I think, those are probably some of the things that I think I've seen change in education.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and they're all really good points, because I just realized now that there's such a huge difference compared to the past. So now looking back before COVID, I mean, I wasn't a student in the 2000s, but just before COVID, when I was in high school, like everything just happened in the classroom, and we're pretty much like taking notes and just write down as much as possible, whatever the lecturers or the teacher said. But then COVID came, and then everything moved to online. And so we had discoveries, pre-reading materials that we had to do. And so lectures weren't really lectures anymore, and it turned out to be Q&A, that kind of thing, just to clarify the misconceptions. And then out of lockdown, when everything started to get back to normal, we feel like we need more adaptive and flexibility in learning and teaching. And that's a really interesting thing to see and to experience. And then now at the moment with so many technologies like generative AI, and I think that will give like a lot of challenges for education as well, which we'll definitely touch on later on in our episode. Just get back to what you mentioned before now. You mentioned about STEM. So I'm just very curious about what are the misconceptions that people usually have about how university level STEM education is delivered?
That's a really good question. And I think I'm going to piggyback off something that Betty mentioned earlier, which is, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that learning happens when you've got this person at the front telling you things, or telling you exactly what you need to know. I probably used to think that as a student too, but sort of being a student and now being on the other side and seeing the things that students struggle with, I now know that that's not the way, learning happens when we talk about STEM education. And so I think that's, one of the biggest misconceptions, that it's the educator at the front of the room. And when I was a student, I used to be there with my digital recorder, which I purchased using my own money, because back then lectures weren't recorded. And I used to write down every single word and memorize every single thing that they said. But looking back, did I actually understand what I memorized? Probably not. I didn't really understand, and I definitely didn't remember those things a month later. It was, in one year, out the other. So at this faculty, we are really, really big on active learning, and I think that has been shown time and time again how effective that is, because passively hearing information, you don't learn if we're talking about STEM education or most education really. So I like this idea that you have to do something to learn. You have to do something to figure out what you know. You have to do something to figure out what your misconceptions are. And then you start to reform your idea of a concept or a problem and then figure out the solution. So yeah, I think that's a main misconception that stands out to me.
Yeah.
What about you, Betty?
Yeah, I might just add to that. So I think that many people outside of academia, Helen, would not have a good appreciation of the effort that actually goes into teaching and the lengths we go to provide a great, or at least attempt to provide a great learning experience for our students. And I also believe the misconceptions people have about university level STEM education is that STEM education involves memorizing a bunch of facts, to go back to what you said, Helen, and also Nell, and perhaps that it's a bit of a sort of individual or a bit of an isolating or solitary experience. So my style of teaching, and as Nell mentioned before, and in fact, the faculty's teaching model emphasises, this application of knowledge, which is really important. And that's why we provide the information and that pre-learning beforehand. The teaching model encourages problem solving and critical thinking. For example, we ask the students to consider case studies in the workshops and in the interactive lectures rather than just memorising a bunch of facts. Our teaching model really embraces skill development. And additionally, we encourage teamwork and collaboration, which is really important, allowing students to, work on tasks together and learn from each other. And in fact, Nell and I are interested in teamwork as an education research area, and our long-term plan is to build a teamwork curriculum.
Fascinating. Yeah, because I remember back in high school, I used to have to cram a whole bunch of notes. And my lecturer, my teacher even said that, when you go into university, make sure that you have a tool to record your lecture and take good notes. But it seems like we no longer need the recorder anymore because everything's now available on slides, and we have Echo 360, which automatically records everything. And then I could see that the assessments at university level is no longer similar to what we had in high school, because now we have a lot of assessments that require hands-on experience, collaborative learning, working in teams, and we have different roles like QA manager, QC manager, and then lab manager, project manager. So we all role play different roles, and then we all aim to deliver the best final product that we can. And that project it's worth a really huge part of the assessment components, rather than in the past, we just purely memorizing everything and do tests and exams and stuff like that. And so how does your style of teaching and learning compare to all these assumptions? Have you changed your style of learning and teaching?
Yeah, well, I think, teaching generally, again, has probably not only my own teaching, but I think teaching generally, has changed.
Yep.
And has really adapted to, the rapidly changing world. It's changing, month by month, year by year. And that's because of technology. So what we've done is incorporate technology rather than shy away from it, is incorporate technology into the classroom and adopting new teaching strategies to meet the changing needs of students, and perhaps also changing the emphasis, which is what you suggested, Helen, and Nell mentioned before, from purely knowledge-based learning, which is important as well, but changing the focus to skills-based learning. And I'll hand over to Nell.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Helen, because, and you also touched on the fact that there are all these jobs now that say didn't exist 5-10 years ago. And I think STEM education, the beauty of education is it's not static. It's ever adapting to what's required in the workforce. And so what Betty is just talking about in terms of incorporation of technology, education has changed in terms of that. And then I think another big adaptation that we've gone through is, as Betty said, from going from knowledge-based to skill-based. So both our degrees at the faculty, whether we're talking the pharmaceutical science degree or the pharmacy degree, now both have a very, very big focus on skills. And I think that's as a result of the changing needs of the workforce these days. Information is available. You can learn information from anywhere these days. What the employers are looking for is whether the person coming in is the right fit for their team or their institution or the company. And so because of that, we now have these skills that are embedded into what we're teaching, so whether that's communication skills or teamwork skills or reflective practice, whatever it is, because we hear back from the employers, we have, I can't even remember, Betty, but I think every 5-10 years we have our most common recruiters and our employers provide the university, the tertiary sector feedback on what they're seeing from the graduates. And so the last time that happened, we were told that skills is something that needs to be amped up at the undergraduate level, which is what we've tried to do. Aside from those skills, I think we've done a good job of embedding some lifelong skills into our degrees here as well, and into our own personal teaching material, whether that's resilience or whether that's the need to be empathetic, whether that's the need to display integrity in terms of being professional, because those are things that will most definitely, students will encounter those things once they leave uni. With technology, I think things are changing again. Speaking from personal experience, a lot of the units that I teach or unit coordinate at the moment, we used to routinely use animals for a lot of our laboratory skills. And that is undergoing some pretty significant changes, not just at this faculty, but across Australia, across the world, globally. The use of animals is getting more and more difficult. And so we're at a point where people are looking to technology to fill that gap. We can't use animals anymore. Now we're moving more into simulations and virtual reality. And so, again, trying to give students tools to understand these complex concepts, but using a different methods, in this case, technology. I don't know, Betty, if you wanted to add anything more to that.
Yeah, thanks. I will, Nell. I was just going to say, and again, Helen, you touched on this before, the pandemic, COVID, has further accelerated the adoption of technology in education. So even if you weren't using technology and you weren't used to it, you were kind of forced to learn how to use it and incorporate it into your teaching. I mean, I don't know about you, Nell, but prior to COVID, had you ever heard of, let alone used Zoom? Because I hadn't.
No, never.
Yeah. So with, and universities have shifted to online learning, obviously, during the pandemic. And, some universities still continue to deliver lectures remotely, and that might not change. So this shift has really highlighted the importance of flexibility and adaptability in education. So not only from the student's perspective, but also from our perspective as well. And that's really a good thing, because it's really promoted us as educators to find new ways to engage students. And sometimes that's in a virtual environment, which is actually quite tricky to do compared to doing it face-to-face in the classroom. And I guess looking to the future, it's likely that technology will continue to play a significant role in education. And as you mentioned before, Helen, especially with the introduction of generative AA, but that's probably a different conversation for a different day.
Yeah, we've mentioned a lot about all the skills and the things that technologies can bring to us, including a lot of challenges. So with those challenges, with technologies, and when things are online or requires more flexibility and adaptability, what are the approaches that Nell and Betty, you guys have applied to really facilitate student discussions and encourage them to really encourage curiosity, because it's really hard to get students engagement these days, I believe.
Face-to-face, I find engaging students face-to-face a lot less challenging actually than online. And I find that, and I really noticed that this year when we are, teaching face-to-face, fully face-to-face. And that's based on the fact that, if we're trying to explain a muddy concept that students don't understand, I have the ability to see your faces and read your body language, and I know what you do understand and what you don't understand, and I think that makes a really, really big difference. So if that's in an online environment, if I've lost you, I have no indication, especially if the cameras aren't on, of what you're understanding or what you're not understanding, unless you're telling me in the chat. And so I think that actually helps to promote engagement, in that it's a little bit of a conversation too. Okay, you don't understand that. What about this, etc. Face-to-face, I still, I'm a firm believer in sort of using technology in the classroom. So I use Polev quite a lot, and I use it for students to, respond to multiple choice questions, but also even short answer questions, so that students can practice answering short answer questions, and that can prepare them for upcoming tests and exams. My personal style is, if you remember, Helen, is reasonably relaxed. I like to tell the students a little bit about me. I like to talk about what I did on the weekend, etc. So I'm a firm believer in making myself at least appear human. So I think that also it helps with engaging students, because students, I feel that if they feel they can connect with you at, in some sort of at some sort of level, they're more likely to ask questions, etc. And the other thing I like to do is to sort of talk at two levels. So sort of keep things nice and simple, because I'm again a firm believer when I'm describing something, keep it nice and simple, because that means that most of the audience will be able to understand. And I think that's particularly important at a first year level, where we have students that have come into the classroom having studied biology, for example, or not having studied biology, and then talk it at another level, and then try to spark curiosity by saying, giving an example of, okay, this particular condition, okay, that's beyond what you need to know, but read up about it. It's fascinating. So that's what I like to do. So a bit of a mix, sort of, I guess, talking a little bit about me and trying to engage students, sort of talking at two levels, incorporating some technology, and trying to, make the students understand that it's okay to ask any sort of question, whether it's, sort of face-to-face or on the discussion board. In other words, trying to make myself approachable.
My perspectives are probably a little bit of a mixed bag too, Helen. I was just thinking, face-to-face, when the students are in the classroom, I think a big challenge is getting students to the classroom in this day and age.
Yeah, that's right.
Once they're in the classroom, I totally agree, Betty, what you were saying. All of those, all the strategies you just mentioned, absolutely. And connection is very, very important. I think if we think about engagement and technology has two sides, the good and the bad. Technology has opened up so many ways of educators connecting with students and finding different ways of delivering information to students. But the flip side is, I think with technology, there's this feeling that students are relying maybe a little bit too much on the technology. So, for example, I said that the challenge was getting students into the classroom. A big hindrance of that is technology, because lectures are recorded, for example. So from the students' point of view, absolutely, we have given you flexible ways of approaching your learning, being in the classroom or watching the recording. Now, if we have students that are, for whatever reason, struggling in a unit, my biggest piece of advice is get yourself into the classroom. That will make so much of a difference. It's never going to be the same learning experience if you are relying just on the technology without that instructor being there and having that one-on-one conversation. And not just with the instructor. I think another missed opportunity by not being in the classroom are the conversations you have with each other. You know, without those conversations, you might not even realize what's not clear to you. And then you have the opportunity to speak to people like Betty or I or you know, whatever. But yeah, I find technology is an interesting thing. It's opened up so many opportunities for educators and STEM education in general, but it's also changed education immensely. And I think in terms of going forward, we have to be clever about how we use technology, whether that's how educators use technology or how students engage with technology in terms of learning.
Yeah, that's true, Nell. I think we have to be open-minded too. So we're talking about, you know, things like generative AI, not to ban and run away from it, but to try to embrace it and to show students the limitations of it. You know, those sorts of things are really important too, rather than sort of shying away from, you know, there's always going to be something new out there, especially, you know, now technology moves very, very quickly. I mean, who would have predicted that this year we would have, you know, generative AI, you know, to that extent that we're actually, you know, worried about it sort of thing. So we've got to, you know, really think about embracing tools like generative AI and showing students how they can incorporate into their learning.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think face-to-face learning and teaching can be easier, but at the same time, it can be more challenging, especially post-COVID. And with all these technology, students might feel like there's really no need to go into the classroom because everything's online, everything's recorded, or they can just simply search it up on Google or ask ChatGPT to find the answer for them. But the thing that they will miss out is the very insightful discussions that they'll have with the peers, because a lot of the times we don't know what we don't know.
Exactly.
So by having the conversations with your peers, they can actually poke holes into your knowledge. And that is how you can grow and add up to your knowledge, and to really have the connections with the lecturers and with your colleagues, like they'll all add up. And those are the connections that you can't just simply build if you're online. And so what do you think these changes will forecast the future of science education? Specifically, generative AI, how will that affect the delivery and the style of the teaching? And possibly, how would you use these technologies to your advantage and not shy away from them?
That is the $1 million question, isn't it, right now? I think generative AI, if we're talking about specific forms of generative AI, ChatGPT obviously is one that's been a big game changer this year, but we've been using generative AI for many years. It's just really ramped up this year. A couple of things come to mind. I'm not quite sure I'll be able to answer your question, Helen, completely, but a couple of things come to mind. One is, as Betty said, we have to learn how to coexist with these advancements. They're not going anywhere. And I don't think, nor should they, because it's just a sign of how times are changing. And I think for me personally, I've tried to keep an open mind, because there's no point saying don't use these things. That's irrelevant. These things are here. These things need to be used. We should be using them. And very importantly, we should know how to use them. And I think that might come into education And we're seeing some of that come into education at the moment. There's lots of educators around Australia, or, well, here at our faculty, but of course around Australia and the world, who are trying different ways of how to use it, how to teach students how to use it. I think that's really, really important. Teaching students when and when not to use a very powerful piece of technology like that, because there's lots of instances where it can be very, very useful, but at the same time, knowing when it's not appropriate to use that is equally as important. For me personally, I'll just maybe comment on how I've tried to engage with these tools, and Betty, I'll hand over to you. In my classes, I've tried to be quite open about generative AI tools this year, and I've actually encouraged students to use them, see what it can do. I've felt probably it's come as a shock to some students when I've said that, but at the end of the day, I do want you to use them because you can actually learn a lot from tools like this. To give you a couple of examples, at our faculty, we have lots of international students that come from all corners of the world. And, Helen, you mentioned earlier that Betty and I co-lead an international engagement program. And one of the things international students have told us for many years in studying that program is that when English isn't necessarily their first language, that they struggle with sentence construction or word choices or how to structure a report. Nothing to do with the intellectual knowledge, but more to do with the language part of things. Tools like this and technology like this are a total game changer because it sort of evens the playing field now. You can use these technologies, and I think that you should use these technologies to learn from them, because if you're not particularly good at sentence construction, I sometimes, am not, you can kind of dabble in these tools, see how they do it, and then use that as a framework to when you come to doing the same thing. So I think using it as a learning tool is a definite tick from my end. And then maybe, Betty, I'll pass over to you because I was going to say highlighting limitations is equally as important, but maybe you could mention that as well.
Yeah, I guess, look, I agree with everything that you've said, Nell. And, as I mentioned before, I think with all these new tools, we've got to embrace them and learn how to use them and educate students about how to use them ethically. Right. So, and I think that's really important. So something, that I've done, and I know, Nell, you've done something similar this year, is actually say to the students, there is no problem actually using these tools. The problem is if you pass the work off as your own. So, just like you wouldn't ask your cousin's husband or your best friend to write an essay, you can't get a tool to write an essay. You can use the tool, definitely, as Nell said, so you can formulate a structure for an essay, for example, use it as a guide, most definitely. It's a fantastic educational tool like that. But if you purely plug something into ChatGPT and then went, here, that's mine, well, then you're in breach of academic integrity. So I think it's all about educating students as well as educating ourselves as to the best way to use it. And at the end of the day, we can't shy away, from tools like this. It was like, like with Google, really, you've got answers at your fingertips. It's not about not telling students not to use Google. I mean, I would be a hypocrite. I use Google. And certainly I've, dabbled in ChatGPT myself for some ideas, as Nell mentioned earlier before. It's, encourage students to use it, but tell them sort of the right and wrong ways of using them. And as Nell mentioned earlier, also the limitations. So we know one lecturer here who ran a workshop where she actually asked the students to work on some problems and compare those answers with what ChatGPT actually generated. And because they were quite mathematical and required quite a lot of critical thinking, you're smiling, Helen, maybe you were in this class, but because of those two things, ChatGPT initially got it right, but soon as something became a little bit complicated, it got it very wrong, but it was quite convincingly, wrong as well. So again, fantastic educational tool, because then the students went, hold on, this is my answer. This is what ChatGPT came up with. Okay, where has it gone wrong? And then they could actually see for themselves what the limitations of ChatGPT were. So again, I guess at the end of the day, it's about, again, for want of a better word, taking up these opportunities, using these game changers, embracing change, full stop, and learning how to best use it.
Yeah, fantastic. Because I've heard a lot of stories from other schoolmates, and they all said the same thing. And some of them said that when you ask ChatGPT to provide you a list of resources, it can do that really well. But when you actually have a look into that, a lot of the resources are not true, not real, or they're not reliable at all. So it's still really educate students to know which resources or which type of information is reliable and can be useful for them, and to really educate students, as Nell said before, to use it to our advantage and to really help formulate, like especially for international students, can help draft the essay writings. But at the same time, we need to know the boundaries to not breach academic integrity, like Betty has mentioned before. So I guess sometimes it's not all black and white, but we really need to be aware of that and be aware of the academic integrity and whether or not it's your work or it's actually someone else's work.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And Helen, just to comment on something you just touched on, these tools and technology and whatever else we see in the next, couple of years, they're only as good as the person using them. So you need to be able to critically evaluate what these things give you, because if you can't do that, then it's useless. Because as you said, at the moment, ChatGPT, for example, might create fake references, but it looks very convincing. But if you don't know enough to go and then check up those references and realize that obviously it's not founded on anything, you need to be able to recognize these things. And I think that's what we're, trying to teach. So STEM, just going back to STEM education, the needs of many different career pathways these days, critical thinking, your ability to think critically. It's not so much, content-based, but we are trying to teach you to be avid critical thinkers, to basically question everything you see, because in this day and age, there's an infinite amount of information coming at you. Some of it's wrong, some of it's right, some of it's very, very wrong. But you need to be able to make that judgment call on what's correct and what's not correct.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Thank you, Nell and Betty, for your fantastic insight into the development of science education throughout the years. And I really hope that our audience today have gained a lot of insight into some of the engagement strategies and tactics to utilize such powerful tools like AI into teaching and learning. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us, Helen.
Thank you for the opportunity. We've really enjoyed this discussion, Helen.
Joseph Pharma acknowledges the traditional custodians of the various lands throughout Australia on which we connect today, and pays respect to elders past, present, and future.